Public Works Committee meeting to order. First item of business is the minutes from October 1st. Paul, do you have any comments?
Just that they're well done. Yeah, I don't see
Very good.
anything.
I entertain a motion to approve.
I would motion.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
It's kind of easy with two of us, or it's kind of embarrassing, actually, but. What do you think, Paul? First item, a discussion on the refuse recycling 5-year contract with Advanced Disposal.
All right.
Mike, do you want to give a little?
Yeah, I'll give a brief overview. Before we begin, Jim, Jim, what's your last name? Smith. Jim Smith is here from Advanced Disposal to answer any questions that the committee may have while we're going through talking about this document. So that's the reason he's here, and I believe we're also inviting him to be a part of the actual council meeting as well when this is approved. But one thing that he did reach out to me about today was on the issue sheet under the 2019 pricing. The pricing that's listed on the issue sheet is actually from when the contract was signed. So this was back from 2015.
Okay.
So those numbers are actually different from what's on the issue sheet. So for the 2019 pricing, the 35-gallon container fee is $9.48. That's what was charged in 2019.
Okay.
65-gallon is $10.76. And then the 95-gallon is $12.43. And then if you go down to the recycling fee for the 65-gallon cart, those were $3.47, all the way across the board. So same for each one.
340.
Yep, $3.47.
347.
So then when you compare those updated, because I'm sure what happened, every year there's a small percentage increase from 2015, 2016, 2017, so on and so forth. So those are the numbers that reflect 2019, and then if you compare those numbers to 2020, what's proposed, they don't look as drastic. It's only roughly a quarter raise then in rate.
So what's the percent increase over the, roughly, percent increase over what people are currently paying?
It's a quarter more a year, so.
It's a little over 2%.
2%? Yeah. So we did, Deb did hand you just a red line version of the contract. Both our attorney and Advanced Disposal attorney have reviewed the contract. I know at the previous Public Works Committee meeting, we did talk about a 1-year contract and then going out for RFP. After speaking with Advanced, it would drastically increase their expenses for this year. And talking with Aaron, what he suggested is, we're competitive in the market right now. Our rates are very competitive to surrounding communities. River Falls is at $14.20 total for a 35-gallon cart, and we're at $14.25. So, and this is based on last year, so I'm sure theirs is increasing. But Aaron said, we're competitive. We're not getting a lot of phone calls about service, so on and so forth. And instead of fracturing a relationship that's been going very well with Advanced, to enter, he's recommending, and I agree, just enter into another 5-year. And then after the 5-year contract, if we're still serious about going out for RFP at that time, then do it at that time. But to try and force something right now, seeing that hit their costs we would get a lot of pushback from the community. Because I think Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like a $5 increase on the total cost.
It was, we talked about it.
Yeah.
Increase is what we talked about, but yeah.
Yeah. So instead, if you look at that 2020 price, the total residential monthly rate, instead of $14.25, it'd go up to $19.25. Instead of $15.50, it'd go up to $20. So it's a pretty dramatic jump for just a 1-year service. And they got to do that to protect themselves from, some of the stuff that they have as far as operationally is concerned. We get the better rates the longer the contract is, right? Because they know that they're going to be in town and they can, supplement their services, so on and so forth. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we don't have numbers for just a 1-year RFP or 1-year contract. It's the numbers that we have in the schedule here are for a new 5-year contract.
So those are those locked in for 5 years then?
No, so
So
there's a,
they can increase over, I see what you're
Yep,
saying.
yep.
Okay. So these are just the 2020 numbers?
these would be the
Go to
20
page
ton.
8,
Yep, page 8.
Okay.
7, 8.
So it says service fee annual adjustment halfway through the sheet on page 8. It says annual service fee adjustment will be tied to the published CPI, water sewer trash index of, or 3% minimum. This index will be applied to both trash and recycling services. Recycle fee will be adjusted after recycling processing service fee is calculated. So a minimum 3% adjustment for every subsequent year, minimum. But what we suggested as a staff was to put in a not to exceed percentage just to protect ourselves. And if it does go above that, that we would renegotiate with advanced disposal at that time. So that will be entered into the contract as well. And I believe it was, what did we come to a conclusion on that, Jim? Do you recall from our meeting? 2 and 4?
2 for floor and 4 for room.
Okay, yep,
We'd renegotiate if it was higher or lower than that.
yep. So we'll update that language as part of that service fee annual adjustment. And then I guess the main thing that, you know, why we're bringing this tonight is the committee has previously wanted to explore biweekly recycling versus weekly recycling. So we did get numbers on that, and you can see in the issue sheet for the weekling, you know, so you look at the 2020 table, right? So that would be for biweekly recycling service. So biweekly recycling service in 2020 would be $4.50, okay? If you go to a weekly recycling service option, that number jumps from $4.50 up to $7.50. So $3 more per month for weekly service, which is, you know, an extra $36 a year. And what I want to convey is that from advanced disposal's operating procedures, it's either all or nothing. So the individual property owner can't selectively choose, I want a week, and then the neighbor says, I want bi-week, so on and so forth. It's the whole, because otherwise it becomes just a nightmare to schedule, to know what schedule they're on, so on and so forth. You get people doing bi-weekly, and they take advantage of the system, and then, you know, they're throwing their card out every week just because everybody else is doing it, but so it's either all or nothing when it comes to the recycling services.
And and that would be locked in for 5 years?
With the annual adjustment.
Okay.
So the question is, why would we go to a weekly? Have we been getting input from the community that we need to do that?
There's a group of people that would like to explore the option. And I wish Sarah was here because I think they've reached out to her about it.
I know I asked to look at these numbers. So I know for our family, like, we're not the average family. I got 4 children, and
Right.
biweekly does not work for us, even with the biggest size, because we just have so much stuff.
Yeah.
Now, if it was a single person or something, they probably don't need they don't need the weekly.
Right.
So I was curious about that. That's why I was asking for the numbers. I do think it's also good for a city to encourage recycling, because what I sometimes get concerned about is if your recycling's full, I think people are taking that and putting it into the weekly garbage, right? Which over the long haul is just not a good environmental practice.
Sure.
But I don't know, I don't have any data in terms of how many how many households we're talking about. So I was gonna ask Jim, actually, because you're in the business. What do you see in terms of do you service other cities that do a weekly recycling?
Jim, do you
So-
wanna come up to the podium?
Can you talk a little bit about, like, just outside of Hudson, how that works with the weekly?
Biweekly recycling is very, very typical, and the average individual recycles about 15 pounds every other week, okay? 7.5, 8 pounds a week is the average amount. And I think what you will find, and being a garbage man, I believe in compaction, So when my wife wants to throw away a box, it comes out whole, and what's the first thing I do? I cut it, I flatten it up, I make it fit in the recycle container. And, you know, part of that education is something we all need to work on. We also need to think about things that, it's called wish cycling nowadays, and so many folks want to try and recycle their garden hose, or so many things that truly are not recyclable. I think we've all heard about China and what's happened over there and the green fence, and it's about contamination. And we all need to be better stewards of what we are recycling. We all need to work to remove any contamination. Pizza boxes, we all want to recycle pizza boxes, but they're contaminated with food. They're not recyclable. So what that does is it creates an issue at the processing plant, because we need to pull that out. It goes through everything that it possibly can. It looks like cardboard, but we have to pull that out, okay? And very, very simple thought process right there, but the processing costs have tripled over the last few years, such as cardboard. It's gone from the mid 100s, $130, $150 a ton, to a $30 value. Heck, even aluminum's down to around $1,000 a ton. I think most of us can remember the 1,500 plus a ton days for aluminum. The commodity values are so low, and it's about contamination, and it's about getting any of the contaminants out of the stream that we can. I'll be more than happy to work with you personally, if it's a second cart, if it's a larger cart, if it's any of those things. We can help work with some of that, and Mike, Deb, whoever will work with you guys for that. And as I sit here, is there something that the city would like to work through, whether that's some type of a larger container that we would pick up with a front load truck, or to haul recycles around in a roll-off truck is very expensive. But, you know, is there something that we can do to help the folks that have more? I'll go back to contaminations for just a second. It's so easy for us to put a trash bag in a container, put the recycling in it, and then take it out. That trash bag creates so much havoc in the processing that take that bag and dump it in there and leave it in your container for a while, and after it gets to smelling, throw it away with your trash. But bags are no good. I can remember years ago we used to use front loaders for recycling, and you know, stuff would fly around. Bag your recycling. That's not the thing to do anymore. So some things have changed, but we can help with some education if that's beneficial.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is from your experience, is the every other week sufficient for most households in the towns that you work in?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Unlike you, I rarely fill up a 65-gallon cart with trash or recycling every other week. And there's two of us, you know, so, you know, 4 children, we're not buying as much.
Right.
But yes, every other week, 65-gallon cart is good for most folks, other than, I'll say, Christmas time.
Yeah.
We have some extra stuff to recycle and things to that effect, but most of the time, every other week, recycling is very adequate.
Would it be possible to do a second, would it be possible, like, right around Christmas to do a second pickup or something like that? Or is that just really hard to do?
We just don't have the equipment
Okay.
or man hours to do that.
Okay.
We just can't do that. You know,
Yeah, no, I get it.
and along come Christmas trees, and along come other things.
Yeah.
and
There's just so much to get picked up,
Yeah,
is what my
yeah.
point is, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you serve other communities that do the weekly pickup?
We do not in Wisconsin or Minnesota, but our company does in several other areas.
Okay.
And it is part of several municipal contracts.
Right, that's, I know other cities are doing it weekly, so, yeah.
And what you find is the participation rate is much lower on the weekly basis. So people don't put their card out until it's full. That's what
Oh,
happens.
I see what you're saying. They might do bi-weekly anyway. Okay. Go ahead.
All right, interesting.
Yeah.
Have you noticed is there a significant trend for more recycling being done, coming out of Hudson, for example? Do you,
Not noticeably, no. No.
because I know for us, the two of us, the bi-weekly just works,
Okay.
just barely works, So
Okay.
occasionally it doesn't, and then,
Yeah.
I use our neighbors,
Yeah.
We have friendly neighbors, but, so I try not to throw it away.
Can it be, so the contract's for 5 years, to Paul's question, can it be switched? Let's just say a year from now or 2 years now, we want to give it a shot and try weekly, or can it be done on the fly or not? Do we have to wait till 5 years is up?
We will need just a little bit of period of time
Yep.
to plan for it, but we can make that happen.
'Cause I think what you'll find is, just like anything else in the city, you're gonna have half the people that support it, and you have half the people that say, I'm just fine with what I got, and I don't wanna
Right.
pay the extra $36 a
Right,
year, you
right.
know?
Right, and one of my hesitations is that I like the idea, and I think the city we should encourage recycling as much as possible. But on the other hand, I also know that every year, our taxes are going up per homes, and so do we want to add
Right.
this as do we want to mandate that? And that's where I would struggle with a little bit, so, yeah.
I would agree. The other thing too, like to Jim's point too, is education. I mean, there might be families with young kids that are throwing out pizza boxes that can't be, right? And it's educating, they're filling up their recycling containers with contaminants, and
Yeah.
they're not actually supposed to be in there, right? And so if they were actually to recycle what they're supposed to, bi-weekly, it probably would work just fine, And that's
Right.
probably, you probably find that all the time,
Yeah.
Well,
Literally-
that card that you put out, I think, does really clearly lists,
Yeah.
I think, what's
Yeah.
recyclable and what isn't, but you have to read it, and you have to keep it around, and
Yep.
you have to remind everybody in the family.
Literally about 20% of the recycling, the single-stream recycling we collect is trash. That's a high number,
20%.
yeah.
And then, would you know how much, would you have an idea of how much, do you do the trash too, or just the recycling?
Pardon me?
Do you do the trash also, or just the
Yeah,
recycling?
yeah.
So the reverse question then, what percentage of trash would you think be recycling?
Oh, gosh, I wouldn't. I-
That's what I'm curious about, because if you've run out of room, are people tossing the trash, But we don't know, so.
Yeah. They're not sorting it at the processing.
So then a processing question for us, does this go to common council for final approval?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I would love to hear from Sarah tonight, but she's obviously not here, so I'm just thinking it'd be interesting to present both of these options at common council when that happens too.
Yeah. And what we,
Just to have more people think about it or look at it, so.
I mean, what we could do is we could introduce, it's such a short window to get a good feel of what the
Right.
community wants, right? I mean,
Right.
we're coming down to the last hour, but I mean, we could introduce the contract at the 18th for just discussion and not take any motion on it. And then have people reach out to the council members that could give feedback on what they'd like to see. And then we do a formal action in one of the December meetings
Okay.
for the contract. We could do it that way, maybe.
Is the deadline, the end of the year, is that the deadline for?
Yeah.
Okay.
December 31st contract. What my fear is doing it that way is you're going to hear a lot from people that really want weekly recycling, and it's going to skew, you're not going to hear from the people that, and how do you get the message out? That's government in general. We're always
Right.
fighting to get the message out and get people to reply and get involved and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't want to hear from a dozen, 2 dozen people, and all of a sudden we're switching everybody, and then we get 1,000 phone calls when we go to weekly recycling, their bill's a lot higher, right? I also
Right.
don't want that to happen.
Right.
So, I mean, there's something to consider, but I think that's the main thing for, this contract is, and Sarah had brought it up, is the weekly versus bi-weekly. I think that's the biggest change.
I think-
What we gotta decide on as a community, as a
Right.
council.
I kind of like the thought of not making the change now, but figuring out some way to get a measure on that. How important is that it's coming? I'm now about 2-to-1. I was about 50-50, recycled, non-recycled, and trash. Now I'm about 2-to-1.
In term, 2-to-1, which being the greater?
More recycled than trash,
2-to-1.
yeah. So it's, So it's increasing,
Yeah,
and I'm more careful
Yep.
and I crush stuff. But I sort of like that option, and I don't know how we could do it, but what you say is we could hear very loudly from the people who really want it and not hear from the people who don't care or don't want to pay, we won't hear from.
Right.
So it'd be like, I'd want a structured method of finding out how important that was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an important enough decision that you're gonna wanna take your time on it.
Right.
To do it within a month and a half is probably not feasible or fair to the community members.
right.
But maybe to get some feedback over the next year, and then we implemented it January 1st of 2021.
Yeah.
If there's an outpouring of support for it,
I think that's a
guess
good,
that's mine.
good, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'd be comfortable with that. I mean, I just think we should fish it out to the public and say, what are your needs? And maybe the need's not there, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it'd be great to get input. So, but I agree with you also that that's hard to do in 6 weeks, so that's too small of a time frame.
we struggle with it. We can maybe tie it in with the comp plan, some of the polling that we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, we can maybe do it
About
like
that,
that
yeah.
too. You know, communities are becoming more environmentally conscious, green practices, so on and so forth. In order to make Hudson more green, we're looking at proposing weekly recycling in the future. Is this something that you would support? Here's the dollars amounts that it would cost a homeowner, average homeowner, so on and so forth. We can get a bunch of responses that way too. So
Yep.
tie it in with something bigger.
Yep. So are you looking for a motion tonight?
Yeah.
So, and do you want a motion for either the biweekly or the weekly for one specific?
Yeah.
I think we should make a recommendation.
Okay,
You know, one way personally, that's why I'm saying, we'll recommend, my motion would be that we would recommend staying with the bi-weekly, but start evaluating that, switching to weekly recycling as a possibility. Find a way to get some good data around what do the people want. As if,
is that a motion?
yes. that's-
Okay.
Got that, Deb?
I don't know if Deb got it all.
Can you sort all the
I
stuff
got
out of
it.
it?
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay. So the motion is to recommend to the council that we stay with the biweekly recycling, but that we look at a way to determine how useful, how valuable it is, would be to the community to switch to weekly recycling. That will give, that's the end of the motion. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. How much time,
Thank you.
would it take you, a month, 2 months to gear up to switch to,
2 would be plenty of time.
okay,
Yeah.
2 years, is that what you said?
months?
2 months.
To gear up, once we say,
If we went to a weekly, you're saying, yeah. Okay, I think that's good.
So I'll be in touch, Jim.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's get together and see if there are other ways that we can help, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks,
Thanks
Jim.
for coming.
next item is the epistle from the review of the proposed changes to urban forestry tree ordinance, chapter 229.
So as part of the urban forestry DNR grant that the city received this year, part of that project was to update the ordinance. The current ordinance was done back in 2012, and a lot has changed in the forestry area. And to make it more of a kind of a universal, more umbrella, more detailed, and give more specifics as far as enforcement, so on and so forth. In the issue sheet, I listed some of the things, expand in more detailed definitions, increase detail of city forester powers and duties, identify public planting areas, including new subdivisions, which isn't identified at all in the current ordinance, details declaration abatement of public nuisance trees, updated appeal process for abatement notices, and then expounds on planting and removal chapters. So it's basically, in the old ordinance, it specified, it was almost too specific on it identified like oak wilt, Dutch elm disease. In this one, it kind of takes those specific nuisances and does kind of an umbrella, if the tree is diseased or dead, so on and so forth. Instead of having to come back every 3 years when there's a new tree disease and changing the ordinance, with emerald ash borer. I mean, we could put it in this one, but then like I said, when it goes through and all the ash trees are gone, then it's the maples, and then we got back here again and changing it again. So it kind of make it more universal, last a lot longer. Is one of the things that I I had done a ordinance update in Richmond, and I felt that Hudson needed a little bit of cleanup work as well, so that's why we included it with the urban forestry grant. So, did propose this to the urban forestry committee at the previous meeting, and they had a chance to review it and made some changes, and they recommended approval following the changes. So I've made those changes, and they are recommending approval to the Public Works Committee. So, here for any questions, and I think we have a gentleman in the audience that may want to speak on this as well.
Doug, did you have, I know you had some comments. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
I will. I'm Doug Rowan. I live at 295 Riverview Drive, technically in Troy, just for full disclosure. Thanks for the opportunity, and I did make some copies of
Thank you.
the comments, and overall I really appreciate the City of Hudson's focus on this topic, because I think it is important, and a lot of communities don't do enough in this area, so that's pretty great. My neighbors and I have been trying to get rid of some public nuisance trees since the end of August. And so part of the lens of my comments is through our current experience with that situation. It deals primarily with public nuisance trees that are on private property, and not so much the public property part of the ordinance, which really I think is greatly enhanced by the changes that are being proposed going forward. So some of the improvements that I really liked were, one, the definition of removal adds some really needed clarification in the proposal, so that I think is great. And the detail on processes and roles and expectations and things is really a good upgrade to the existing ordinance. I've read both of them probably too many times.
Right, yeah.
And really, I think overall it's going in a really good direction. So some specific things that came up as I was looking through it. In the current ordinance, there's a case where a tree or limbs that obstruct streetlights, traffic signs, and the free passage of pedestrians or vehicles is part of the definition of public nuisance. That's been removed in the new ordinance. And really think that the free passage of pedestrians or vehicles should be restored. That is definitely a nuisance if there's a tree across a road and you can't drive on it. And somehow it seems to me that's as much of a nuisance as a standing dead tree, if not more. And there really isn't a defined mechanism or time frame to address public nuisances on private property that impact public safety. So trees that would be blocking emergency vehicles, access to property. Right now we've got dead trees dangling on top of other dead trees about to fall. Could fall on a bus going to the YMCA Camp St. Croix or my car any day. And there is no, other than one little comment, there's no real process for dealing with those situations quickly. Somehow it'd be nice if those could be resolved immediately within 24 hours. If we have to go through this 30-day notification waiting period, blah, 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 blah. I mean, again, we've been working almost for 3 months now to get some of these trees removed, and they're all still there. So the current ordinance isn't working either, but having that less restrictive in the new ordinance, we find problematic. Similar to that, in 229.14 number 3, which deals with private property, adding the time frame of immediately, which is the same as it is in 229.14 3A, on public property would be beneficial. In the roles and responsibilities for the city forester, it does allow owners or occupants of private property to initiate a review of their property if they want to get recommendations. I think that's great. There is no similar mechanism for other members of the public to initiate such a review. And I think that almost directly applies to the situation we're in, where there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for non-owners to make to get input on what's happening on private property that's impacting them. So somehow to address that input might have helped in our situation. I realize that's not the general case for most of the city, but would be helpful. The other frustrating part for me initially was there's no current publicly available way to contact a city forester or even know who it is. There's nothing on the Hudson website. There's nothing in the staff directory. If you search forester on the website, all you get is the ordinances of all the great things the city forester can do,
Yeah.
but there is no,
Designation or no contact.
there's no contact, there's no input. And I don't know if that hits the SOPs that you're going to talk about later or if it needs to be in the ordinance, but that would be nice. In the removal section, it would be nice where there are specific rules on revegetation, that might be noted there, not specifically, but in that broad general way to say if there are revegetation requirements when you remove trees, that they also be followed. And the example I used was NR 118 for things in the riverway. There may be others that I don't know about. That's why I don't think you need to be very specific there, but just a reference, if you take stuff out, in some cases you need to put stuff back in and do that in a responsible way. Intent and purposes. There is nothing in the intent and purposes, if you look at the A through F thing, they all refer to the public property, and there really is nothing that says the intent is to also look at private property. There is a comment at the end that references it applies to private property, but not that that's part of the intent of the ordinance.
Okay.
Does that matter? I don't know, but it's just kind of maybe a technical detail. Another technical correction I found, in the definition of public nuisance, it should be referencing 229.14 rather than 229.15. Kind of a minor thing. And then the terms public nuisance, nuisance tree or shrub, and nuisance tree, shrub, or part thereof seem like they're all used interchangeably, but you really only have one defined term. So it'd be nice if the same term was used all throughout the document to be consistent, or if there are reasons for the differences, to define the terms differently.
Okay.
Kind of another technical thing. So, those are some of the things that I noticed. I'd be happy to answer any questions on our specific situations, but that's not really what this forum is about. As drafted, this ordinance doesn't seem to help me in our specific problem we're dealing with right now. In fact, it makes the public safety part worse because it changes the notification or the actions from 14 days to 30 days. So it actually hurts public safety in the city through that little lens.
Yeah, that was a recommendation by the Urban Forestry Department.
And I understand if it's not an emergency situation, extending to 30 days probably isn't a big deal if it's a standing dead tree, but
their concern was if we notify someone, just giving them enough time to contact, whether they're going to do it themselves or contact a
tree service.
Giving them an appropriate amount of time instead of, having us go in there and remove it and then bill them and they say, we didn't even get a chance, because they're so busy and tied up type of thing.
And I think that's very fair if there was a mechanism to deal with those kind of emergency situations. I mean, we had one time where 6 trees fell down in one day. And, it's been 3 months for me to try to get those trees removed so far, and there still is no time frame for removal by either the owners, which is Creative Homes, or by the city. So, it's kind of an issue. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions now, or if there's other inputs I can give going on as we're sort of living through this in real time, at least a piece of it. But overall, I think the direction that you're going with the ordinance is really positive. So these are kind of minor points and probably don't apply to the broad as general things for most of the city of Hudson, but some specific things that we've noticed.
Okay, well, Doug, thank you for taking the time to review and compare the ordinances. I was looking at this one and said, I don't know what the old one said. so,
Yeah.
and I don't have time to
Well, right,
try to, so it would have been nice if this had been kind of a redlined version.
okay.
I don't know if that's
No, we can do that.
possible or not next time, but
Yeah, we can just, if we want to postpone.
pops up the significant
Yeah,
changes.
I mean, there's certainly no rush on getting it through council. We can postpone, we can bring it back to Public Works Committee in December with the red line version. Or just, see, the Blue Stem Forestry basically created this ordinance from scratch, taking other, community ordinances and putting them together based upon kind of what we had. So there's really not a red line version, but I could certainly
Okay.
supply the current ordinance so you see kind of what the differences are. I can maybe make some notations on it too.
You're
to
saying
kind of
they're
direct.
that significantly different. This is really it's not a redlining, it's a
No,
rewrite.
it's a rewrite. Yeah,
Okay.
but maybe taking into account some of what Doug had said here tonight, we can include that as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I would share some concerns about a couple things that he mentioned.
yep,
For the, first one, removing the definition of a public nuisance, or a tree or limbs that obstruct streetlights, traffic signs, a free flow of pedestrians. And those are, to me, are the, kind of like the biggest issues that I see with trees in Hudson.
Yeah.
Is particularly our streets, or where we have older trees or grown trees. That's, I don't know, is that the most common complaint that we might get?
Oh, yeah.
People have, I've been tempted when on walks to take a pruners with me, but it probably would not be a good idea. So, then can you help clarify why that was adequate covered elsewhere, or is it?
there's no reason why that would, it's in 22917, item 2, obstruction of signs, signals to travel, all trees and shrubs located upon any public way or upon any private premises adjacent to the public way shall be kept trimmed so that the lowest projecting branches provide a clearance of height of not less than 16 feet above the travel portion, not less than 8 feet above the public sidewalk. City forest may waive the provisions of this section for newly planted or naturally low-profile trees. She determines that they do not interfere with public travel, obstruct the light or any street light, obstruct the view of any traffic sign or signal, and endanger public safety.
So it sounds like it's still there.
Except it doesn't trigger all the provisions related to a nuisance. So that's a requirement, but it doesn't, under the definition of nuisance, which triggers all the actions, it's not in the definition of nuisance.
Okay?
Does that makes a difference in the enforceability?
Good name. Something I'll look into.
And a comment that non-owners, non-property owners, and I think people most likely to complain about a public nuisance are the people who don't own the trees, not the
Yeah.
people who do own the trees. So somehow, we want to make sure we don't lose that conduit and the ability to say, okay, yeah, we need to consider that as valuable input. So I just don't want to I want to make sure that that's not happening.
Okay.
Mike, my only thought, sorry, Jim, did you have more?
Go ahead. Your turn.
Oh, well, I don't have a lot of specifics on I appreciate your input here, because
you.
this is a realm that gets really technical and really difficult. And what I'm thinking about is like, has Kathy, like our city attorney, had a chance to look that over? Is that something we would run by her at
Oh,
some point, or?
absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
just to,
Prior to going to council, she would review it.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my only thought. If we maybe give her some of the comments here,
Yep.
and then we could revisit it at a future meeting after, that might be just helpful, so.
Okay. Yep, that's fine.
Who does the city forester report to? Is that part of your organization, or?
We don't have a city forest.
So
That's him.
we need to, City of Hudson doesn't have a city forester as we speak, right?
Right, we used to, yeah.
Public Works Director is the city forester. We do have city staff that works primarily on forestry-related issues, but they're not designated as a city forester. So, and that goes back to compensation, title, so on and so forth. It's something that, you know, in the future, we're big enough now that we could designate a city forester, because there's enough work out there to supplement it, you know, the workload, so on and so forth. So, I mean, that's why, you know, and I think Tom, my predecessor, was also kind of the acting city forester as well. Nobody was appointed. So, I mean, it's just kind of carried over from when he left and when I took over.
What should we do?
Well,
What do we need?
if council wants to give me more money to give someone a raise and appoint him city forester, that'd be fantastic, but
What would they gain us?
it would give us, you know, that person would be the go-to person for any issues like Doug is having or any other community member, and he would have the ability to enact and enforce the ordinance as it's going to be written. And personally, I mean, not, you know, I got a lot of things going on, and to do a city forester position on the stuff that I'm already doing it's not very realistic
Right.
and feasible,
Yeah. It's like,
which is why, you know, Doug's having problems with getting in touch with you.
I don't think we want you doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah. To me, it would make sense if someone else would do that,
yeah,
connected to public work, you know, to your
Yep.
department, but somebody else has that authority.
yep.
Yep.
It's an internal discussion on staffing and compensation and
Yep.
so on and so forth.
Can we fit it into the budget timeframe? We've got a week?
I don't think so.
I'll have to ask, I can't answer that right now. I'd have to talk to Allison and Aaron.
I think it is, as long as we're doing this and we still have the terminology in there, that we need to recognize the enforceability of this is not adequate right now.
And to be honest, I mean, that's a lot of our code, right? A lot of communities have code enforcement officers designated to basically enforce the code. It's something that Hudson doesn't have, and, you know, we're at that point where we're getting to that size where, yeah, we could probably keep someone, you know, busy all year round with code enforcement, but what department takes it on, so on and so forth, it's, you know,
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
So-
you could say that about any code in the city as far as enforcement. It's
So
not a proactive enforcement, you know, it's if someone calls, if someone, you know, writes in a complaint to City Hall, so on and so forth, then it's activated, we look at what the code says, we go and we take care of the problem. Someone's out there actively enforcing the code.
I'd like, it's not a crisis kind of thing, but I'd like to see the staff start putting a proposal together on that.
Yeah.
We need, it's another grow-up step for us.
Yep.
Yep, and even if we don't get it in this budget cycle, we could do it next year.
Sure.
So I don't think there's a rush to do it in the next week, but we could carry over like you've been doing, but then it gives us just a sense of how to move forward long-term and getting the pieces in place, so.
Hope the best, right now you do the emergency stuff and
You know, when it comes to the emergency abatement, typically when you're abating an emergency, it's to protect life, property. You know, if you have a split bark inclusion or something like that, and, you know, it's noticeably going to fail within, you know, a short amount of time, and it's hanging over a place set in someone's backyard, a neighbor, so on and so forth, you know, that's when the emergency response is triggered, right? That's when, you know, we know there's a problem. We know it's gonna fall on someone's house, or it's gonna fall on where kids congregate, if it's next to a school, so on and so forth. We want them removed ASAP, right? That's when that emergency. So, you know, that's kind of the distinction that myself and my staff make out in the field. They make a judgment call. You know, where are these trees located? You know, that's kind of the determination on if we give the property owner 30 days or we give them, you know, a 24-hour notice type of thing, and we're going to be taking them out. So that kind of is the distinction between the two, just so that you know.
That makes sense, yeah. I think that makes sense. And then that's at your discretion. You can figure out if you need to do it, basically. Yeah.
So, well, I will make, I'll get in touch with Kathy, with Doug's comments, and I may end up putting this back on the Urban Forestry Board committee meeting here this month for them to review as well, and get another set of eyes on it, just to look at it once more. But like I said, there's let's do it right. So, I mean, I don't want to push it through. If there are concerns, let's do it correctly, and then, because I don't foresee changing this for a really long time after this.
Yep.
So,
That sounds great.
okay.
Great, thanks, Mike. And thank you, Doug. Okay. Discussion on the fee structure for parking lot closure requests.
Oh, you missed number C.
I think
Letter
there's,
C, I'm sorry, letter C.
Review draft standard operating procedures for the urban forestry program. I just jumped to urban forestry.
Yep. So this is basically a continuation of our previous discussion. As part of the urban forestry grant, the concern going into this, especially with Emerald Ash Borer being in the community, is to have some standard operating procedures. We were going to make it a urban forestry policy, but with the discussions that we've been having with policies, and I don't want to box ourselves in, so I'm recommending just making them standard operating procedures that we can change on a committee level instead of having going through council. It still gives the department guidance as far as what, planting, removal, what, boulevard public trees, Emerald Ash Borer. So it's more intended for the urban forestry committee to give them something to follow. I know they were really concerned about property line trees. What do we do in the event if ash tree or a tree that's a nuisance is on a property line, who's responsible for it? What are the city's standard operating procedures for that? What are the laws, so on and so forth? So this document basically just covers those, issues that we may run into, and helps kind of guide staff. It guides the Urban Forestry Board Committee when there is appeal, so on and so forth. They can reference a document and say, well, what are our SOPs for this situation? So it just gives them a document, something for a tangible, something to have in their hands that they can, help justify a decision one way or the other. So that's why we've had these put together. They felt it was important. I agreed with them, and we included it as part of the DNR grant.
I think it's well written. My only questions, are you comfortable with the, with some of the numbers in there? For example, new trees will not be planted within 10 feet of a fire hydrant, those types of things, not placed within 30 feet of a stop sign or 15 feet of a street light.
Yep.
I just want to make sure you're comfortable with them, like they're not too close, is the only thing when I looked at this over, or
Sure.
looked it over
Yep.
initially, so.
You'd want to see more distance?
Well, I mean, I'm not, it's not my field, so I'm not an
know.
expert, but I just wanted to make sure you're not, if you're comfortable with it, I am comfortable with it, but
Yeah, if you really think about it, though, 15 feet of a street light, by the time the crown gets up there, it's enveloping,
that's what I'm,
encompassing that street light, so we may want to,
that's what I'm thinking, is that it might be blocking some of that. So just increasing some of those distances was my only thought on some of this.
yeah. Okay. I'll note that.
But if it's a standard operating procedure too, it sounds like there's some flexibility with, right at the committee level, or, so you're not necessarily locked into all of this either, so.
Yeah.
Does this and the tree selection procedure, you walk down a street that has even a 5-foot boulevard and ash trees in the middle of it, and then we're dealing with sidewalk issues. Does this help us there? Does that at least get us to focus on that, or are we still going to?
It does designate 5-foot boulevard. Whenever a new development is coming in, I'm reviewing that, and I'm trying to increase those boulevard widths to at least, no less than 6. Obviously, we run into some right-of-way issues with some of the developments that we can't go any wider than 5 feet, but
Do we plant smaller trees than we used to?
Yeah, we're definitely being aware of the size of the tree and putting the correct tree in the correct location. So in our much narrower boulevards, we're planting trees that aren't gonna be like your big, big elm trees or your big maple trees anymore, like we see in the downtown district, or your big ash trees where, in 30, 40, 50 years, you're running into all those curb and sidewalk issues. We're being very more mindful of what we're planting and where,
Well, this is very nice. It seems to cover a lot of issues and helps define limitations, something that that the public can be given for guidelines.
One question on the emerald ash borer, Mike, do you?
Yeah.
Where it says, there's that 3 bullet points. It says like ash trees will be removed when the following criteria are met. First one, known and suspected infestations of EAB.
Yep.
When 50% or more of the canopy is in decline, or structured removals to reduce the ash tree population. My only clarification was just, are you saying all 3 need to be met, or just one of those 3? Or it wasn't clear when I read it.
One of those 3.
Okay, so when any of the criteria met is kind of what you want to say, maybe?
Yep, I can specify that.
Yep, okay. Yeah, I was kind of hoping you weren't waiting for all 3, but
No.
I just wanted to be clear.
All right, so I guess what I recommend is, I'll bring this back. I'd like to put the SOPs through with the ordinance, just because it's a lot easier just talking about it one time.
Sure.
They kind of coincide with one another a
Sure.
little bit, So there's really no reason to push this through to council yet until we get the details ironed out with the ordinance. So if it's okay, I'd like to just, postpone this as well with the ordinance and just bring them through as one package at the same time.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yep.
Certainly fine.
Okay.
This is good work.
Yep.
It's a nice step forward.
Yep.
And I think it'll give the guidance you need for
Yeah.
the department to,
Yeah. And I'm looking out for, not only the staff, but the board as well, because, over the next 5 to 8 years with the emerald ash borer, there's going to be a lot of tough decisions with, big ash trees that are behind people's yards in the downtown area and property lines. And there's going to be a lot of people coming to those meetings. What is the city doing? What are you going to do about my neighbor's tree? That they can physically have something that says, well, our standing operating should say A, B, and C, and this is what we're going to follow, type of thing.
Yep.
So it helps protect them so that they actually have something to follow.
yeah. And one thing I really appreciate about what you've been doing, not only tonight, but in all these areas, is thinking long-term and thinking systematically about things. And I think that's going to make everyone's life easier in the future, in a sense, so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I appreciate that. So, all right.
Okay, next item. Discussion on the fee structure for parking lot closure requests. I just wanted to get that one in a hurry.
Yeah. So, every year, at the end of the year, the city reviews the fee schedule. And one such fee schedule that we need to review is the parking lot closures. In the years past, in the previous fee schedule, a community member or an organization could rent out or lease, or I should say, rent out our parking lot for $25 a day, okay? Well, this was okay when we weren't charging for parking now like we are in the bathhouse parking lot. And, those are the lots that are rented out the most are the ones that have the permit, the 8-hour permit. So the bathhouse, the north lot, and then Williams lot. So I know like the north lot and the bathhouse are rented out periodically throughout the year, okay? So those lots are our 8-hour permit lots, which means if someone comes in and wants to rent that lot, where do all the permit people go, first and foremost? And then secondly, the city wants to capture that money that, people other than permitted parkers can park in that lot. We want to capture more of that money that we're going to be losing. So I guess what I'm proposing is, I counted in the issue sheet, I basically made up a little spreadsheet. Each location, there is a designated amount of parking spaces. And all I did was I took 50 cents per hour, which is what the current rate is for the parking, and I times that by the number of spaces in that lot to get an hourly charge. And then, so let's just say Hot Air Fair wants to come in and rent the north lot, which they have in the past, to kind of organize their parade. They want to rent it for 2 hours, north lot, $32 an hour, because we're basically having to shut down that lot for 2 hours, and we want to recuperate that revenue that we would otherwise have.
Right.
Because it's going to be busy, right? So this is a way to kind of justify some of the costs. Now, this is not set in stone. This is something that I bounced off of Mike Johnson and myself. And he's like, yeah, let's go with it and let's bring it to the communities and kind of get some feedback from them. The max day rate is based on 8 hours. So we can, enforcement goes from 10 to 8, so it's technically 12 hours. So we reduce that to 8 hours max a day just to give some relief because, the beach house parking lot, that gets pretty expensive in a hurry, right?
Yes.
And then we didn't want to charge for 24 hours because we only enforce from 10 to 8. So we can't really charge for 24, so we had to cap it somewhere, and we felt that was a fair kind of compromise. One of the things that we're going to want to be mindful of is we are probably going to hear about, some of the nonprofit organizations in the city and how, Hudson Boosters, so on and so forth, can we afford this? We can't afford that cost, so on and so forth. So is there a provision that we want to put in there for nonprofits to get a reduced rate? My problem is then everybody becomes a nonprofit somehow, some way, and then we're not recouping anything. So, there are some variables here that we're going to want to consider. This can be, the new fee schedule doesn't go into effect until January 1st. So, this is kind of just introducing it. We can take it to a council level for discussion, revision, so on and so forth. So we do have a little bit of time here to play with the numbers and get some other ideas. But this just gets the ball rolling to say that, hey, we have an issue here. Let's try to fix it somehow, some way.
The rates, to me, my first thought is they're really reasonable. 50 cents an hour in capping it, I think they're affordable. So I'm, unless I'm off, that seems like an affordable rate to me.
Yeah, the rate is, but I think particularly the boosters, they probably had that lot for 6 days. The beach house lot is $2,400 versus $150 that you're paying now. So that comes right out of their operating funds.
Yeah.
So that's a big hit.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are others. That's just the
Yeah.
one because that's one of
And,
my fees.
from a staff perspective, basically this spreadsheet is just recouping lost revenue,
Right.
for the day.
It's absolutely the way to start.
So, on a Saturday, if someone's going to close down the beach house lot, I've seen Saturdays here, that thing's going to be full, right? And we can't just get $25 for closing down that lot. We're losing money, So we're losing half the amount of money per hour. So basically, that's like Jim said, this is a launching point. This is a start point. It makes the most sense to me. But we can certainly have those conversations in the future about nonprofits, so on and so forth, But
Do we have an idea how many times different lots are closed or rented?
Deb might know that better than I do. Throughout the season, do you know?
Well, we have Spirit of St. Croix Days and Yellowstone Trail, Hot Air Fair, and Booster
Hudson
Days.
Boosters. So for it,
Pretty
and
much.
So they're
we
Once
may
in
get
a
a
while,
random,
They're bigger
random.
events.
a random festival here and there, but maybe half a dozen.
Perhaps.
Races usually don't close parking lots pretty rarely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even that large one, that
Nope.
half marathon?
They just have,
Which they were
Extra
they had
handicap.
parking up at the,
yes, right.
Yeah, that was an issue.
in the courthouse.
No.
But, so a nonprofit could also say, well, people are going to, either we're going to pay or the people are going to pay, right? So it'd be like, they can make the decision also to
Right.
just let the public pay or people pay you come to the events too.
Yeah.
If it was too outside of their budget or something like that.
I mean, the reason that most of our parking lot closures outside of Hudson Boosters, because that's a whole nother animal, because it's the festivities down at the bathhouse. But organizations are renting the lots to basically parade organization. I don't know what Spirit of St. Croix does.
That's usually for the artists.
Okay. They set up booths throughout
Yeah, so they have the artists.
so that one's
park
unique
there.
as well.
Hot Air Affair would be obviously the parade. The parade route is for Hot Air Affair for that closure. Booster Days, of course, is Carnival.
Minnesota Orchestra, they
Minnesota Orchestra has.
They close that lot.
We kind of usually we're trying to get them down that way, and theirs is mainly handicap.
oh, handicap,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's handicap.
But they're still having to pay. I mean, they'll still have to pay if they go to the Minnesota
Well,
Orchestra.
the Minnesota Orchestra is kind of a.
I think the
a city.
interesting figure would be, what's that gonna cost us? I mean, given what we're doing today, what's the dollar amount, using these figures, here's what we would charge, using your estimates. It's, I don't know, maybe 80% start with 100% of if you used all the meters for 8 hours.
Yep.
That's a good way to start. And just look at the number of times we've done that. See, what number are we talking about? Is it worth because most of it is nonprofit stuff.
Right.
And I know how hard it is to raise money right now.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that the nonprofit doesn't necessarily have to close out the entire parking lot, right?
The other thought I had too is like, if it's a city identified community event, there could be some exceptions applied to that as well to kind of get around that. So that's another option as well.
let's take this to council for discussion.
Okay.
And do we need to go to we don't need to go to anybody at the park board or anything, do we?
No.
No, Jeff,
But,
our safety didn't want it.
Yeah.
No, I think we take it to council to discussion, and then council can approve a staff recommendation,
Let's see if we can come up with a listing of when these happen, how many times it happens.
Okay.
And who
Like
it
the
is.
events, you're
Yeah, we
saying?
can include
Yeah,
that.
what are events and
Yep.
who's affected by this?
Okay.
And then we can say, this is what it's costing us, $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, for that, I wouldn't even
Right.
want to
That's
Good point.
stir the current around parking any more than it is right now.
Yeah.
But it's a good thought. We need to look at it. It's a change. Now we need to authorize which way.
Well, because we do
Recognize.
have other people that do come in and need spaces. That's kind of what we've been running into. The single spaces, we've been charging, $5 a day. So
Yep.
it's
So if
4 of them.
if a contractor is working downtown and they need to block off 4 spaces to
Stuff like that.
perform work in a building or something like that, they used to come to the city, fill out a form and get a meter bag that they placed over the meter. They'd pay $5 and then a $20 deposit, which they would get back when they return the meter bag. But of course, we don't have the meters anymore, the old meters, so we're thinking of a different way of, and we'll do some cones with some no parking signs, so on and so forth, but, the 10 to 8, 12 hours, 50 cents an hour. So we basically try to recoup the money. That's $6, so we should probably look at that one as well and updating that one. Yeah.
Definitely. Because it's the time too,
Right.
staff time and putting the cones out.
Yeah.
keeping in mind.
If it's not too difficult, let's bring the data about how frequently that
Okay.
happens
Okay. Yep.
and who's in.
We'll include it in the issue sheet for the council.
Excellent.
All right.
You guys are thinking a lot of stuff here. Discussion and possible action on speed limit signage on Oak Street.
So this was a recommendation from the Public Safety Committee meeting last week. Councilmember Hall has been receiving some phone calls from area residents with just the pedestrian safety up behind the high school on Oak Street and Chestnut. And Public Safety recommended installing speed zone, or school zone signs on Oak Street because according to the state statute, they're actually supposed to, any adjacent street to a school when kids are present is supposed to be 50 miles an hour. It is not required to be posted, but a lot of communities post it regardless. We do have, a majority of our schools already have it posted. It's just Oak Street doesn't have that signage on it, so they made a recommendation to install that signage on Oak Street. So bringing it to Public Works Committee for approval to install those signs.
So you want a motion? I would move to approve the 15-mile-per-hour signs on Oak Street.
I would second that. For discussion, I know the recommendation from the person who did the bike audits was extend beyond Oak Street. Is there a reason? And when I left, I thought that the discussion was done on that, was more.
Yeah, so after you left, Chief Willems did look at the state statute, and there's a little bit of gray area what an adjacent street to a high school is. And both he and the city engineer wanted to do some further research before we start signing Chestnut, just to make sure that we're not putting the city in a liability, whether it's warranted or not, so on and so forth. So they were more than comfortable doing Oak Street because it borders the high school.
Right.
Anything outside of that, they were like, well, let's do a little bit more legwork before we start putting 50-mile-an-hour sign.
Authorize the Public Works Department to install the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit signs on Oak Street. All in favor? Aye. Anything else that, we got funding source. Funding for this, okay, never mind. That's the,
Yeah.
We're at
That's it.
project update. Project update.
let's create a budget issue, because didn't we reduce our signage budget for next year?
We'll get it in quick.
Ground's freezing already, it's crazy.
Is there anything else to report? No,
No.
Move to adjourn?
second. Our next meeting,
Yeah.
when is, I'm showing a December date, but
Well, that's because we had a December date, and then we ended up with this one.
I just go to Deb to keep that all straight.
We had the 9th of December.
Yeah, the 9th. So that is, we're gonna cancel the 9th though, right?
No, we'll have it.
On the 9th, you wanna keep it on the 9th?
Is that a Monday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's keep
Does
it
that
on.
work for
Monday
you,
at
Paul?
5 o'clock, because that seemed to be the
Or do we
date
need-
that everybody could be here.
We talked about it last meeting. I don't have my calendar on me, but yeah.
Okay.
I think that was the one that worked,
Yeah,
right?
that was the one. That was the one that was working.
And what time do you want to do, Jim?
5 o'clock.
actually, at this point, I have a conflict that I can't get out of,
Okay.
but, so someone else may have to chair the meeting.
Okay.
You said that you could be here.
Yeah. When did that come out?
Long time ago.
My schedule changed yesterday.
Yeah, we'll keep it the same. Paul and either Paul or Sarah have to.
Yeah, I can do
Okay.
it. Is it 5 or 5:30 though?
5 o'clock?
Okay.
If that's okay?
Yeah, I can make it work. I gotta get you home out of here early.
Tuesday, if there is an issue.